the way to make money, which is what you're doing, yes, you probably want to make an impact, and yes, you want to support your values and the values of your community and all those things. But if you're not making money, you're going out of business. So you have to make money. So if you want to make money, understand that money comes from the value you created for your customers, not from how much it costs for you to make the thing. So you could spend $1 million to make one of these amazing paintings that I see behind you, but that doesn't mean that anyone wants it. Just because you work so hard, people have to want it. You have to solve a problem for somebody, or they're not going to give you their money. So focus on what problems you can solve and just notice them, collect them in a notebook or something. Like you notice a problem. It could be a regular person problem, like their sidewalk's not shoveled, or it could be a business problem, like their taxes get filed late every year or something. And so like, okay, what are these problems? Find problems. And if you find a really expensive problem that you're qualified to solve, then solve that. And the price that you set is based on the size of the problem, not how hard it is for you to solve the problem.
Welcome back to Swurl Radio. I'm your host, Eric.
And I'm Ika. At Swurl Radio, we stand for those who messed up, ruined relationships,
bombed a grade, said the wrong thing, lost the ideal client,
overpromised, underdelivered, showed up late, and missed their shot.
Today, we're sitting down with someone who made it his life's mission to change how independent professionals get paid. But we wanted to go deeper than just advice.
Because before the books, before the daily newsletter, before the coaching community, there was a software developer who had to unlearn everything he thought he knew about work, money, and what his career was supposed to look like.
We are excited to welcome a former software developer turned pricing consultant, author of 5 books, and a daily newsletter writer with over 10,000 subscribers. But today, we're going beyond the business advice and get into the real story behind it. Welcome, Jonathan Stark. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Jonathan.
Thanks, folks. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I mean, you covered the big picture, which is I'm a former software developer who's on a mission to rid the world of hourly billing. But I'm calling in from Providence, Rhode Island, which is near Boston for people who aren't in the U.S. And it's snow on the ground still from a couple of weeks ago, so it's been real cold here.
I have to say this because we've had a lot of backgrounds, but your background is very unique. Can you tell us a little bit about that chandelier and that wallpaper?
Yeah, this is the craft room. It's like a finished sunroom, so it's just like where my wife keeps all of her knitting stuff, which is why it looks nice. And if you saw my office, it wouldn't look so nice. Just be black.
What architecture is that?
Yeah, it's a Dutch colonial from the 30s.
Oh, okay.
So
That's cool.
not crazy old, but not brand new.
I wish I had
Nice.
something like that. I'm in the basement of our place, so this is where I live, and me and Ike are married, so now we know.
Oh, there you go. I like the artwork.
thank
That's
you.
all Ika. Well, Jonathan, everyone that we invite on here, I always give them one question in the beginning, and it's the same question. So I wanted to ask you, if LinkedIn disappeared tomorrow, and we all had to reintroduce ourselves without the titles, without the
Yeah.
resumes, I would love to know, what would you lead with, and what would you want to know about someone else?
I just tell people I help independent professionals price their work instead of bill for their time. And they might say, what's an independent professional? And I'd say, like software developers and anybody who would traditionally charge by the hour. And if they were curious about that, they wouldn't be able to get me to shut up for probably 45 minutes. So yeah, it's
That's your
yeah,
hook.
that's basically it. Yeah, I'm the ditching hourly guy. Like, oh, how else would you do it? And then now you're off to the races.
I'm just curious, there's a little history. When did people start charging hourly? We're going to get
Oh,
into your
man.
story, but I just
Yeah.
want to know.
It was so the story is, and I found decent, not proof, but decent evidence that this is more or less true. I want to say it was in the 40s-ish in the United States in the legal space. And somehow the bar association or some regulations, back then legal stuff was just fixed price. And they decided it would be more transparent if everybody published an hourly rate, and then you could sort of decide who you wanted to work on based on their hourly rate, which is, I mean, in my opinion, fundamentally misguided. And it doesn't even pass the sniff test for like rational understanding. But I think it probably spun out of Taylorism and the sort of scientific management school of thought. At the time, it was still like heavy industrial revolution. People wanted everything to be standardized and like interchangeable, and there were lots of benefits in like a factory space for interchangeable parts. The automobile interchangeable parts, very important feature of a car in modern manufacturing. And I think people tried to start to apply that to things like pricing or things like management, that kind of thing. So probably came from there. But that is just a guess on my part. But it supposedly did come out of the legal industry.
Oh, interesting. That makes sense.
So before you were the ditch hourly billing guy, I want to know, who
Mhm.
were you? What would
Sure.
the younger Jonathan think his career would look like coming up to
Mm.
now?
Well, in high school and college, I wanted to be a rock star. So I played guitar
Really?
like, yeah, like 16 hours a day. I played guitar constantly. I'd skip school to go to music stores and just play Stairway to Heaven until they kicked me out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I did that pretty seriously. I went to Berkeley, which is a college of music in Boston, graduated from there, was in a band in Boston for a while. We never went anywhere. I mean, it was just playing to our friends basically, but it was really fun. And then, whatever, one thing led to another. Band broke up. Did sort of a Dave Matthews-y solo guitar singer type of thing for a while. Um, Started to get sick of the starving artist thing. So I had been familiar with computers when I was a little kid. So I started doing computer stuff for money. And then I was really enjoying it. And I was getting kind of disgruntled with the music space, like club owners stiffing you and staying out too late and drinking too much and all of that stuff. I was getting, I was probably like, I don't know, yeah, God, I don't know, late 20s, early 30s. And so I was like, maybe it would be cool if I wasn't like broke and, looking for quarters to fill my gas tank. So I got some jobs doing computer stuff and I loved it. And it was a really natural thing for me to do. So I just started getting jobs doing that. Got a corporate gig doing FileMaker development, which is like a desktop database software thing. And that went really well. And I felt like I was started to feel underpaid after I had a couple of real home runs for them, which is probably not true, but that's how I felt at the time. And then I went solo. And that's when I ended up at the FileMaker firm where I had this sort of epiphany um, about hourly billing being nuts. That was sort of the transition up to that point, and then that got me to the ditching hourly phase.
I'm actually surprised. I wanted to like roll it back to Berkeley because it's a pretty famous school for music. I'm surprised they didn't prepare you guys for the business, the agent, the gig
No,
life.
they did. No, they did a good job of that. Honestly, in fact, my major was double major in songwriting and music business. Even though I was a
Okay.
guitar player, I was like, well, I can take guitar lessons from the best guitar players in the world. That a lot of them lived in Boston. If I wanted to pay $50 an hour, I could get whoever. So I was like, I don't need to go here for guitar. I need to go here for songwriting because I didn't know who to learn that from, and in business because like, where are you going to learn that except for the hard way? And I think they did a pretty good job. It's the thing they teach you. The business stuff was more about here are all the different ways a musician can make money. Publishing and performance and just a whole bunch of things that you'd never know from the outside. So it gave me no. I think they did a really good job. The thing that they didn't do was um, teach you how to like. They teach you how to play really well, and they taught me really well about the business of music at the time. Then it radically changed after Napster and then Spotify.
Yeah.
Um, but what they didn't ever teach, I don't think they even had a class in it, was entertaining an audience. So they could teach you how to write a good song, or they could teach you how, the components of a good song. But we would play when the band would play. I was way too concerned with impressing my guitar player friends and not concerned enough at all about making the audience dance or clap or cry, or, I wasn't really there for the audience. I was there to like make them think I was cool or something. It was just the wrong.
Yeah.
And so like I just didn't get that message anywhere at school, or, you know, and then eventually it become, I would say probably in large part because of that, just never really went anywhere. And that was fine. It was a good phase.
So let's go back to that computer. I mean, it's not a very
Mhm.
easy switch. So can you talk about what you went through, kind of
Sure.
training yourself a little bit?
Yeah. So my father worked at the local newspaper my entire life, his entire adult life in Providence. And the newspaper industry is like in a bad way now, but back then it was pretty big industry. It was like, this is pre-internet. This is like 70s and 80s. So it was a big deal. The newspaper was a big deal, and they had a lot of cutting edge technology. And we were the first house in our neighborhood that had a computer at home for a long time. By
Oh,
a
wow.
couple, probably 2 or 3 years, we were because he got one that he could bring home. And this is back in the IBM PC days. There's no
Yeah.
internet. There was no Wi-Fi. There was no Ethernet. There was no nothing. Didn't even have a hard drive in the computer. It just, you had these floppy disks that you would put in.
Yes.
And I just loved it. I loved it. Me and my friends would spend hours just like making little animations out of ASCII art and stuff like that. And
Mhm.
just like, oh, animating a guy running with, the backslash and everything. And I used that a lot. I spent a lot of time on the computer, learned how to write BASIC. There was a word processing program. I think it was called Xywrite, uh, Turbo Pascal. I started learning that. But then I started to get into music, and I was just obsessed with the guitar. So right around that time, I switched to music. But the computer, I spent hours and hours and hours on that thing learning how to program. So then later, when I was in the rock band, we needed a mailing list. There was no Facebook. There was no nothing. It wasn't even email yet.
Mhm.
So one of the other guys was in art school, and so he'd make these collage postcards things that were hilarious. And I'd go to Kinko's and I'd print them out and cut them out. And then we had this one of the other guys, his girlfriend was working at a place that gave her a laptop, and she had an old laptop that she gave me. And I was like, well, I kind of know computers. I'll do the mailing list in Microsoft Access. And then I started getting temp gigs doing computer stuff. And then I was like, oh, I need a Microsoft Access database to do this thing at work. And they're like, we don't have that. We have FileMaker. Can you try that? And I was like, yeah, this is even better. So that was that transition. So it wasn't that hard. It was like a latent skill that I had.
Mhm.
It was a bit of it ended up being an identity shift, because at a certain point I had to admit that I was not a musician anymore. And I'd been telling
Mhm.
people I was a professional musician for like, 15 years. So
Mhm.
at a certain point, it had to just like face facts. It's like, bro, you don't play it. You haven't touched a guitar in 2 months. Like, yeah.
Right.
So but that didn't happen until after I was already pretty well established in the computer space.
Mm. You kind of had to face like your identity transition a little bit.
Yeah. I was like, this is got to be relegated to hobby mode. I'm not like gigging
Yeah,
anymore,
exactly.
And I'm hearing that you kind of went through a situation where you didn't feel seen as an engineer, right?
Yeah, there was a phase where the FileMaker developers in general, it's a great application development platform for subject matter experts who
Mhm.
are maybe a little bit technical, but you don't need to be very technical. And there's a bit of I'd say it's pretty common, if my FileMaker friends are listening, it's pretty common for FileMaker people to feel a little bit of not imposter syndrome, but just like looked down upon by real coders. So
Mm.
people
Mhm.
back then, it was people who were, using PHP to build like websites, PHP or ASP.NET to build like real websites, because websites started to become a thing. So we're up to
Yeah.
like 1998, 1999, .com boom was coming. Everybody was like the web, the web, the web. And I dug that too. And I did transition into FileMaker webs and then
Mhm.
PHP specifically. And then when the iPhone came out, then I went totally into that, but now I'm jumping way ahead.
Well, I know that you worked with brands like Staples and T-Mobile, and then you went to coaching solo freelancers. And as you said before, that was a big identity shift, right? So
Yep.
I wanted to know, what did you have to let go of? I know you let go of the guitar, but what you had to let go
Yeah,
of to
yeah,
make
yeah.
that move?
It's a similar process. I've done it probably 3 or 4 times in my life. There was even a video on YouTube where some FileMaker people interviewed me about how have I navigated these different transitions, and they're approximately 10 years long. For whatever reason, I get sick of the learning curve I had been on, and I'll switch to something new for whatever reason. It could be financial
Yeah,
or it could have just been boredom. And it corresponds roughly with normal life stage changes like graduating from college, getting your first real job, getting married, getting a house, having kids. And so like your whole context changes when those things happen. And then things that maybe were super cool before are like less cool now. I don't know. Maybe there's a
right.
correlation there. But what was the identity shift from sort of software developer to coach? That was a wild one. It all of these transitions, I think what happens is they take like a good 18 months to kind of sink in, at least for me,
Mhm.
where, like I said before, you kind of have to admit to yourself, it's like, bro, you don't do that anymore. Like, you gotta
Right,
stop.
right.
When people ask you what you do and you say a thing you haven't done in 18 months, like, okay. So, what happened though, the thing that kind of sucked me into it was, I was working for this FileMaker development shop in Atlanta, and it was very popular. We had lots of business, very well known, and I was second in command there. And it was an blended hourly shop. So we were billing all the developers out at $150 an hour, regardless of their skill level. We just tried to hire really good people and build them all out at $150 an hour. And that was the situation. When I got promoted to be the VP and I started managing people, all of a sudden I could see all their salaries because
Mhm.
we'd have to have one-on-ones and I was the guy they asked for a raise. And I was also doing a lot of the proposals for clients, writing proposals for new work, and they're all hourly estimates. But once I saw the employees' um, salaries, I realized that we had one guy that was basically an intern. It was mostly all guys and gals that were really experienced, and they were getting paid close to 100K a year. And then we had this one guy who turned out we were paying him 45K or something like that. It was about half of
Mhm.
what everyone else. And his billable hours were just as high as everyone else's.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, wait a second. So if we were going to hire someone, I should look for more people who basically barely know what they're doing. If profit motive is, why this business exists, which let's just say that yes, this business needs to make profit. Then if we were going to try and maximize the profit, I should get a bunch of people that barely know what they're doing and build them out at this same rate. And I suppose over time, maybe we'd take a reputation hit or something, but his clients were perfectly happy. He was a really nice guy, good bedside manner, never talked down to anybody. They could really relate because he wasn't super advanced and he was more
Right.
similar to them than the really nerdy developers were.
Mhm.
So I was like, something's wrong there. I was like, something is wrong with that because our best developer is amazing and we were lucky to have him. So I was like, something's wrong here. And I thought about it for a long time, like weeks before I was like, oh, it's hourly billing. So I'm making a long story for a short question. So I'll fast forward a little bit. Uh, I was like, I don't know what to do instead of hourly billing, but I'm going to figure it out. So I quit, went solo, and started looking for different ways to price software development work. And
Yeah.
the very first year, I found the way or a way, a really good way, and I did great. Like I doubled my salary in the first year. And then what happened was I was fairly well known in the space because I had written a book and I was an editor for the magazine that the monthly periodical. And they would ask me like, how did you do that? Like, how's it going? I'd be like, great, better than ever. And they're like, but how, like, what are you doing instead of hourly? So then people started to ask to hire me to teach them what I was doing
Oh, wow.
and come into conference, could you come speak to our user group? Could you come speak at the conference and start talking about business stuff instead of technical stuff? And it just kept rolling. People kept
Oh,
asking.
wow.
And so one time I was at at a user group meeting in Boston. There's about 40 people there. I gave a presentation. They had tons of questions. We got kicked out of the room because someone else was coming in. And so I told them as we were leaving, I was like, keep sending me questions over email and I'll just answer them on my blog, which was basically nothing, like a nothing blog. So every Monday I'd publish a new answer to the question that somebody would send in, and I'd explain how, at least how I would do
Right.
the thing that they were trying to do. Maybe it wouldn't work for them, but at least here's how I would do it. And after a while I had like tons of those posts, and that eventually became the first book that I wrote about business stuff instead of, I'd written some software books before that, but
Yeah.
this was the first business book.
Wow, so there was a lot of skills, like soft skills that you had to learn, like leadership, managing people,
Mm.
writing a book. That's something. Can you talk to me kind of about the ups and downs of that journey? And I'm very curious about who was involved in kind of helping you throughout this.
Okay, so a couple of things. You're right about the soft skills thing. Even before I did computers, I used to write a lot, but I suppose that's true for lots of kids. It's just a very common creative pursuit, and kids are so creative. But I got a lot of attention when I was little from adults for stuff I would write, and I liked that. So I
Um,
considered it to be one of those things, like, how people say, oh, I'm bad at math. And you wonder, like, well, are you just bad at math because you're always telling yourself you're bad at math? Or
Right.
are you actually bad at it? And so I think I had the reverse situation with writing. Was I always liked writing, especially stuff that was funny, or, either make people laugh, or it was kind of like, pseudo deep, like stoner teenage, like, what if the blue I see isn't the blue you see? So I liked writing stuff like that.
okay.
So that was actually before computers, probably my initial, what felt like a superpower. I knew not everybody could do that. Like, I was winning awards and stuff. So it was like, not a lot of people can do that. So writing, I was just inherent. And I read like crazy when I was a kid. So that's probably why. The leadership stuff, when I got promoted into management, I learned very quickly that I was horrible at it and wasn't really interested in getting better. So like, I was just not interested in the literature or even the advice about how to manage people better. I don't know why. It's just, I've just always been an outdoor cat, and kind of managing a group of people. I just don't like it. I don't like it. And I don't have any employees now, and I never will, because I just don't like it.
Mhm.
So that was a real weak point. I think I was okay at that job, but I did not like it. I mean, I had to fire people. That is the worst, like, it's
Yeah.
the worst. It's like whenever I have someone who I'm coaching and they're like, oh, I think I've got enough business, I can hire someone. I'm like, and like, oh, my buddy needs a job. And I'm like, you got to be ready to fire that guy in 6
Right.
months when work slows down. And if you're not ready to do that, then do not hire him in the first place. Just send the work somewhere else. So yeah, it was not my favorite. An actual book, I got a lot of help with that, because it's one thing to write an article, which is what I would have called my regular writing up to that point. So my boss at the FileMaker firm, his name was Chris, great guy. He actually just texted me the other day. He's hilarious, great, big influence on my life. And he was super generous with, he was kind of famous in the space, and he was super generous with sharing the spotlight with other people.
Mhm.
Um, which had a little bit of a self-preservation angle to it, because if he was like the only famous one and there's 10 other developers, everybody who wanted to work with us wanted to work with him.
Mhm.
And he didn't want to spend his time building stuff. He needed to do write books and things like that. So he needed to make the rest of us kind of famous too, so clients would be willing to work with us.
Mm.
And so when he gave me an opportunity to, what was the first thing? He had a book that he needed to do a rewrite of, a new edition of, because the software had changed, and he didn't really want to do it, I think. And so he was like, "Why don't you write the web chapters, and I'll write the other chapters?" And it was a traditional publishing company, and we started to do it, and I was like, "Wow, this is brutal. It's completely different." Like, right? I mean, obviously, but it is not the same thing as writing, like, oh, I can write one page, no problem. It's not like writing one page 300 times. Like, you need to know where you're going. You need to know like where you're stopping along the way. Your thoughts need to be so much more organized. And so I kept writing a chapter, and then I'd get to the next chapter and be like, oh, I got to rewrite the first chapter. And then I'd do that again. And then I get to the third chapter, like, crap, I got to rewrite the first chapter and the second chapter because it wasn't thoroughly thought through. I hadn't like outlined the entire, anyway, it was really hard. And we ended up never shipping that book. I don't know what happened with the money or whatever, but that never came out. And so that was my first book writing experience, was total failure.
Wow.
Yeah. It was not all my it was none of my responsibility, actually. It was just to Chris. Chris was the one that was dealing with the publisher. So I was like, wow. I got a glimpse of how difficult it was. And then after I had gone solo, right after I went solo, another publisher reached out to me based on some stupid blog post I had written about some technology. It was related to FileMaker and PHP. It was because the web was so hot. It was so hot back then because the bubble had popped, but then it was still like YouTube and Twitter. And they were like, we want someone to write a book about this. And you're the only person we could find who's written anything about it. So do you want to write a book about it? And I said, yeah, definitely. Because I knew that that was where all the business came from when I was at the FileMaker firms, because Chris kept writing books and people were like, oh, he must be the best. Let's hire them. So I was like, I need to be writing books so I can get business. And I wrote that one with some help from an editor, but that was not my best book. That was my first traditionally published book, and it's solid. And a lot of people in the space really did like it, but I wasn't impressed with it. It was okay. It was okay. And it was very helpful to a lot of people. But then I got a book deal with O'Reilly, which is a huge software publishing, probably the biggest one.
Yep.
And the editor I had in that book, and O'Reilly was unbelievably good. They were just so good. It was so oriented around the authors. And once I signed that contract, they sent me a modest advance, but then they sent me like a book called On Writing by William Zinsser, I think his name is. And that book was a short book, but they sent it out to all of their new authors. Absolute game changer in terms of my ability to really keep someone reading, even though it was a software book. So that was fantastic. My editor on that book, it's another long story, but he was fantastic. Uber nerd, really fun, super smart, great at giving feedback in a way that didn't make my, porcupine quills pop out. So he was fantastic. So the whole experience of working with O'Reilly really leveled up my game. And at the time I used to say all the software people, every software person should write a book with O'Reilly because it's complete game changer. Plus they ran all these conferences and they just send you on a book tour and you're signing books at conferences with like 100 people lined up. It was ridiculous.
I was going to say my background is in product design. I have like 20 O'Reilly books right here in the bag, That's a big deal. I mean, but your advice is interesting because my skeptical brain pops up and I'm like, okay, that's not that easy. You can't just write for O'Reilly. What are the steps
Yeah.
you recommend if you're recommending that?
You're not going to like the answer. I'll tell you the exact steps. It was called Providence Geeks, which was a once a month networking event in Providence where all the local nerds would get together and somebody would do a presentation. One or two people would do a presentation. And the senior editor, O'Reilly, who's the guy I was just talking about, his name is Brian. He was the co-organizer with this other guy, Jack, who's I'm also friends with still. And so Brian and I are talking. He's like, well, I'm a senior editor at O'Reilly. And I was like, oh, I wrote a book for Sam's a couple of years ago. It was okay. Kind of a niche title. And he's like, well, if you ever want to write a book for O'Reilly, just like send me some ideas and I'll, send it up the flagpole and see if anybody salutes. So I was like, all right, cool. And this would have been probably 2008 or 2009. My first idea was, I don't even remember what it was. It was business oriented though. It was business for software developers because my brain was already starting to go in that direction. And he's like, yeah, I brought it up at the editor's meeting. Nobody really cared. Do you have anything else? And I said, yeah, I've got an idea for an iPhone book, building iPhone apps with web technology. And he was like, I'll call you right back. And I instantly had, because the timing was utterly perfect because the iPhone had been announced in 2007. The App Store came out in 2008. And the whole native apps versus web apps fight was really it was like AI now. Like people were talking about mobile back then, we were talking about AI now. And they were like, yes, write it, do it. Here's a bunch of money, figure it out. Nobody knew what,
Yeah.
there was no Android yet. It was just like Safari on iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
Me and two other people on planet Earth, except for the people who built the browser, were the only ones who really knew anything about it. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little, but it was a short list of people
Yeah.
that were well known for building websites that worked on iPhones. And, Ethan Marcotte ended up writing responsive web design, or is that what he called it? Responsive web design is the name of the book. But the book I wrote is not the same thing. It was a similar thing around making websites that you could actually use on an iPhone without like zooming in and zooming out and zooming in and zooming out.
Right.
And, me and a few other people would just sort of compare notes online. And then, so that became that book. And that did really well. They translated it into like 7 languages and it still sells, which is insane.
I believe it. It's a lot of books here. You wrote books. You wrote 5 books so far, right? Or is there more I don't know
Something like
about?
that. I mean, there was a point where, I honestly, I'm not sure what the count is. It
Yeah.
depends on how you count it. I've done a couple of second editions. I've done a couple of
Yeah.
co-author things. Yeah. So there's quite a few. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So writing those books, and then I hear it was like 1,700 daily emails
We're
going out
up
there.
to 3,500 now.
Oh,
And no
wow.
AI in there? Like, do you use AI at all in those emails?
No, not at all. Just for the
wow.
grammar. I use Grammarly
Okay.
for the spelling and stuff.
Grammarly, go figure.
Yeah.
So writing those 3,500 daily emails now, was there a point where you ever felt like, I just need to stop this. I don't want to do it anymore.
I think I'm getting up to my 10-year. This summer will be 10 years since I wrote Hourly Billing is Nuts. And so, I could see myself having and kids are getting close to the age where like the older one probably move out. And so we're headed for another big life change. So I wouldn't rule anything out. Like I could pivot to something else at some point. And certainly there is after I've been talking about it, the book came out in 2016, but I've been talking about it since 2009. So that's, I've been talking about this for 20 years, basically.
Mhm.
And, you get the same questions over and over and over and over and over and over and the same arguments. Um, and sometimes it can feel like you're just shoveling sand against the tide, like, the
Right.
Sisyphean, if I said that right, just rolling the rock up the hill. But other times it starts to feel like the needle might be moving. When I hear like, I go on like a legal podcast or an accounting podcast, and I meet more and more people, or they come on my show and I meet more and more people who are they're just skipping hourly from the beginning because people like me and David C. Baker and Blair Enns and a whole long list of people who are basically on the same mission, have been making enough of a ruckus about it for long enough that people are starting to at least be aware that there's an option, where before it was just like, you didn't ask if you should bill by the hour when you went solo. You'd be like, how much should I bill by the hour?
Right.
Let me find an hourly rate calculator, see how much I should charge by the hour. So that's very exciting. And then through just working with people one-on-one and in group settings and in the Ditcherville community, when you get testimonials from people that are just like, because when they get it, it is a massive game changer. Like it is a life-changing switch of mindset. And when they get it and it starts to actually work and they're like, I made $15,000 in 2 days or whatever. I had one guy, he said, he was like working with me and he's like, can you help me with this proposal? So I like revised the proposal and increased the fees by something like $25,000. It was like a lot. I increased I'm like, your prices are too low. They need to be way higher. And the client said yes. And he took that money and put a down payment on a new house. And he was like, if it wasn't for you, like he basically credited that conversation with a new house. So that stuff keeps you going. It's pretty good. And the questions I get on the daily mailing list, it sounds like a lot of work, but it's a lot easier than a weekly one. And it feels more like a community because you get a lot of replies, because I just write short emails about exactly one thing, make one point every day. And then you get these really fun replies from people or questions, or they'll share a similar story. And then I can just post that the next day. And, so it sort of feeds itself. And it feels like a
Yeah.
conversation more than like a big task. Like it does, like I don't have to write 10,000 emails. I just have to write one today and that's it. Take 5 minutes.
When did the podcast kind of swerve into this
Oh, that's a
picture?
good question. I don't even know. Um, I should know that. But I did a podcast I used to listen to podcasts back when the iPod had like a physical wheel that turned like an old rotary phone. And so I think that was like the very first one. And I heard about podcasts. I was a huge Mac fanboy back then, not anymore. And I was listening to podcasts and I'm like, this is the greatest. And as a musician, or at least at the time, I was still considering myself somewhat of a musician. I was like, the gatekeepers are gone. Like radio used to be the big gatekeeper, and it was really, really hard to get your stuff. It was actually, there was a big scandal about payola and people getting paid by record companies to play
Mhm.
their albums. And that was a big part of the music business that changed after I graduated. And so podcasting to me was like, this is direct to consumer music. Like the only other option at the time was to stand on the street and play guitar. And it goes from that to digital files that you can distribute over the internet. And then here's this really cool device that was just catching on like crazy, the iPod. And it was just like, this is the best thing that ever happened to musicians. We could argue whether or not that ended up being true, but I was very
Mhm.
excited about it. So long story short, I was listening to podcasts. This was still when I was doing very techie sort of software development consulting. And I had a good friend that I was working with, and we decided to start a podcast. I think it was 2013, something like
Okay.
that. And it was called Niche, Nitch. And that ran for about 250 episodes weekly. And then we pivoted the focus and started a new one called Terrifying Robot Dog, and did that one for a while, and did another 250 episodes, I think. And somewhere in there, I started ditching hourly. So I'm not sure when, but I think I'm up to almost 400 episodes, and I don't release them every week. So I don't know how many weeks that's like. That can't be 10 years. It might be 10 years.
Wow.
Might have been 2016 around the time I released the book. That would make sense, actually.
So, niche, terrifying robot what were those about again?
Niche and uh, Terrifying Robot Dog were with Kelly Shaver, me and Kelly Shaver. Niche was super duper geeky software development stuff. Like we talk
Okay.
about API design, and it's just like really just for software developers.
Mhm.
Terrifying Robot Dog was more, it was still techie, but it was more like, it's hard to describe. It was just us. We wanted to have a reason to have a phone call every week and basically hang out, and like we might as well publish it. But we would talk about stuff that was maybe a little bit more philosophical is the wrong word, but like bigger picture.
Mhm.
We weren't talking about like, oh, here's how to make FileMaker 9 work on Windows. It wasn't like that. So it was a lot less technical, but it was still in the tech space. Ditching Hourly started off as a solo show that I did for exactly the people who Hourly Billing is Nuts was for. And then later, I started a podcast with Rochelle Moulton called The Business of Authority, and that
Oh,
ran for
another
about
one.
300 episodes. Yeah, people really like that podcast. That's probably the one that has the biggest audience. And I really wanted that show to be kind of like polished enough that we can invite really, to me, famous authors to come
Mhm.
on and kind of pick their brains. So we had Seth Godin and James Clear and uh, Annie Duke and New York Times bestselling authors on.
Right.
Oh,
And
nice.
but most of the time we were too lazy to actually schedule those, and we would just talk about business stuff between the two of us. And she had enough of a different background from me. She came from the sort of management consulting space
Okay.
and not as technical, mergers and acquisitions, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
People really liked that show, is what I think. What I was saying before, they really liked it. People still listen to it and email me about it. They tell me they binge listen the whole thing because we had I think a rapport that people really liked. The chemistry was good. The chemistry with me and Kelly was good too, but the topic was just really inside baseball.
Well, I want to get a little personal here. So, when
Okay.
we're going to roll it back a little bit.
Yeah.
So, I come from a Russian immigrant family. There's a lot of stuff I had to unlearn. You're clearly like a crazy entrepreneur because you had to learn a ton of skills. You had to make connections. You had to also understand the business side, the marketing side of growing your audience. There's a lot there. So I was curious, what did you have to learn or unlearn from your parents and your family and all that to
Mm.
kind of get to where you are now?
It's funny. I think I'm probably a pretty equal mix of my parents. Like my father worked at the newspaper. He was on the advertising side of the newspaper. So he was sort of a ad sales guy when I was really young. And then later he's more of a, trying to do partnerships with like Pravda and stuff like that. So he was like, but he wasn't on the editorial side.
Mhm.
So he's sort of a marketing ad type of guy, which we never talked about. He never talked about work at home. It was like a classic boomer parent.
Oh, wow.
But I would go to his office a lot. And so I was kind of exposed to it. And then on my mother's side, she is wildly entrepreneurial, but in a kind of scattershot way where
Mhm.
she's very creative and sort of crafty and a big quilter. And as a little kid, have some crazy idea. My brother like, you could turn that into a business. And she didn't really know what she was talking about. Like she
Yeah.
never started a business, but she just felt like that could be a business. Like that's a great idea. Just very encouraging in that kind of like, might as well
Yeah.
try it kind of way.
Mhm.
Right.
Um, One major thing I had to unlearn is probably an appropriate word, but it was more like deprogram was when I started getting into the more businessy stuff. It became obvious to me how important marketing was, which is
Mhm.
totally idiotic thing to say to myself. Like when I hear that now, that's like, there's a reason every single company has a CMO. It's like a key piece of the business. So it's very important. But as a engineering type and in the classic Michael Gerber sense, a technician in the E-Myth book, he describes my personality exactly, business personality. Back then, I had to be like, to me, like marketing was evil. Those just a bunch of slimy liars that, just are trying to trick you and get your money.
Mhm.
And then I came across Seth Godin and I was like, oh, he wrote Permission Marketing. I don't know what year it was. I think it was like in the late 90s. And that book and his mailing list were very inspirational to me. And I really had to unlearn the marketers are evil thing.
Mhm.
And what I finally recognized and what I try and tell people now is that the only marketing you notice is the bad kind. It's they're
That's
interrupting
true.
you, they're pressuring you, it's all kinds of tricks and BS. The good kind of marketing, Nike does tons of marketing. Are they
Yeah, they
evil
do.
because of it? No.
Yeah.
Or Yeti, or you name it,
Yeah.
Patagonia. They all spend millions of dollars on marketing, but it doesn't feel like evil or pressure because they're doing it in this permission marketing kind of approach. So that was a huge hurdle for me to get over. Huge. That was a big one.
I know you've coached hundreds of people through business transitions. I'm
Mhm.
curious to know what patterns do you see in people who make it versus who don't?
Okay, a couple things. The don't. I'll start with the don't. Um, People who want everything to be better without changing anything are doomed. So in a program with me, like if I want more clients, better clients. I want them to value what I do more. I want to make more money. I want to spend more time with my kids, and all of these things can happen. Like I've gotten plenty of people those things, but they don't want to change anything and they fight me on everything because like that won't work or that's what a slimy marketer would do or
Mhm.
I can't do this thing for some reason or I'm sure that won't work because I read an article about it. And what they're really doing is they're just, they probably went solo, they got lucky, they got a couple of clients, the clients stuck with them for a while, but the reason they're talking to me is they can see the writing on the wall that that's going downhill.
Mhm.
And they're
Mhm.
like, how do I get all those things that I described in the beginning of this soapbox? More money, more time with the family, all that stuff. A classic one is like, you need to specialize in something. And they're like, no, I can't do that. I love the variety of doing all sorts of different things. I'm like, well, have fun with that because you're not going to have good clients or more money. So I hope it's very enjoyable. So people are fighting me on everything. And it's really this like, they have this idea that the world should work in a particular way. And I'm not going to operate in a way that isn't the way I think things should work. That came out pretty weird. That is what I mean though. And the thing that does, I think my favorite, when I meet someone, I sort of interview them first before we decide if it makes sense for us to work together. And a big one that's helpful is when someone doesn't feel the need to have the entire territory mapped out before they start driving. So if you're going to go from New York to LA, the first couple of days, it's really obvious what you're going to do. You're going to go this way. If you want to go the scenic route or you want to go the fast route, okay, fast route. All right. So then you're going to go this way. And then stuff is going to happen and you're not sure, you're going to get feedback or a road's closed or, oh, there is an attraction I want to take a side trip for. You're going to end up in LA and you just kind of trust the process. So people that need every single step of the entire journey from New York to LA mapped out before they start driving can't help that person because it doesn't work like that. So people who are cool with that level of uncertainty. It's like, are you comfortable with some level of uncertainty? They have to say yes. It really helps if they love experimenting and they don't get too hung up or overinvested in any particular experiment. Because what we're doing is not science as much as people might want to tell you it's science. It's a combination of art and science. There's some anti-patterns that almost definitely will fail, but there's almost nothing that will definitely work. So you just try a bunch of little things, you run cheap experiments, you wait for feedback from the market, and you adjust. But you keep your eye on the horizon of what your goal is. We're trying to get to LA. And I know if we just keep going west, we're going to get close enough that we can then ask people how to get to the final, the final mile.
Right.
So personality of experimentation. I'm not a huge risk taker, so you don't need to be a huge risk taker, but you have to be comfortable making changes and not knowing if it's going to work. Because even when you're failing, it's like, okay, we learned that doesn't work for you or right now or whatever. Those are the big ones.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I love what you said about running experiments and being open to change. I've never heard of anti-patterns. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, it's a software term. It's like patterns in software or product development. Or they're things that you would follow that are like smart, like they're proven patterns that like of a user experience, maybe like a user interface. They're like proven patterns, and then there are these patterns that are kind of like another way to put it is landmines. It's like the kinds of mistakes that beginners always make. Like they're always making the same mistakes. It's very true in business. It's true in probably every field. It's like you learn just enough to be dangerous, and then you fall into these completely predictable traps. So that's just another way to say anti-pattern. It's like a thing everyone does that blows up in their face every time.
What kind of expectations, what kind of guardrails are you waiting for? Because right now it's kind of still the Wild West, right?
Yeah.
So what is something that you need as a writer, as a content creator to
hmm
exist in the AI world?
Yeah. So if it all went away tomorrow, like there was some Chernobyl level disaster or it just got regulated out of existence by world governments, I'd be totally fine with that. It's like, I'm not like a huge AI fan. It's like, whatever. It's like, I find there are a bunch of things it's terrible at,
Mhm.
a couple of things that it's amazing at that matter to me. But if those went away, I wouldn't care. Other than Grammarly, if that goes away, I'd be really upset. But
Yeah.
that's not what you're talking about when you say AI. I don't think. So if it went away, that's totally fine with me. But as long as it's here and it's a tool that I can use, then I'm going to experiment with it. I talk about productivity a fair amount too. And for the right things, it massively enhances your productivity, especially something like software development, which
Mhm.
is a particularly vulnerable, I think, to disruption from this. But you asked about writing. So far, uh, it's really bad at writing something compelling. Like I might use it to brainstorm, like on Sundays, I my daily email on Sundays is like a comic. I do like a
Mhm.
3-panel comic. And it is so bad at it's just so bad at it but sometimes I'll say like, I'm thinking about like, how would Groucho Marx make this point about business? How would Groucho Marx say it? And it can kind of get you in a territory. Like if you have no idea at all, you just have a really vague idea, you can brainstorm with it and it might unlock something, but it can't write. It cannot write. It writes like it's the most boring. Like it's like everything that comes out of it sounds like a Wikipedia article, probably for good reason. So it's like went through a blender and it came out with nothing interesting. It might be factual or it might not. And it's just terrible at that. I was talking to a guy earlier today, one of my coaching students, and it texts him at 11:30 and says, what do you want for lunch today? These are your three options. And he clicked number 2 and then it goes to Grubhub and food shows up. And it's like, I wouldn't do that, but it's kind of amazing and he likes it. So it can do things. That's probably a crazy example, but here's a great thing. It's amazing at this. Claude has been amazing at this since it came out. I've worked with a number of authors who self-published. I've self-published a few times, but I've worked with a few people too. And you give it the book and you like write the marketing copy for the back of this book. And it is fantastic because it has the information. Like you're giving it a ton of information and asking it to come up with a very, very small version of it. So it always reminds me of back in the Photoshop days when you would have a raster image, which probably no one listening knows what I'm talking about. But if you take a picture, like a digital photo or digital image, and you like zoom way into it, it gets all pixelated. If you try and make it bigger. But if you take a really big image and zoom it way down, it's fine because all the data is there. There's a ton of data and you're just making it smaller. If there's only a little bit of data and you try and make it bigger, there's not enough data to fill the area. And that's what it feels like when you ask AI, when you give a little bit of information to the AI and you're asking it to give you a lot back, it's like zooming in on a tiny thumbnail photo and it just looks terrible. It's just like all over chewed or something. It's like chewing too long. But when it's condensing things, it can be fantastic. I think the trick is if there's a long verification cycle that needs to be done after it creates its thing, it's a waste of time. If we get off this phone call and you run this through and Riverside gives you a transcript of it, you'll know if it's right or wrong because you just had the conversation. And if it's wrong, you can just fix the things that are wrong. But if you don't look at it or someone else looks at it and they don't know because they weren't there, then they would have to listen to an hour, 15 minutes, let's say, listening to see if the AI was right. So if the verification stage is very, very short, then it can be very good in terms of productivity. Now, the thing about writers specifically who have published works that have been ingested by AIs is I don't have an opinion about that. And I've written a bunch of books. People have been stealing my books ever since they were digitized.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If you sell a PDF on your website, there's some Chinese website that is selling copies of it. I'm not sure who said this, but it was like, might have been a music person, but regardless, piracy is not your enemy. Obscurity is your enemy. So yeah, that was a music thing because it was about Napster. And it was like, if you were the, yeah, do you guys?
I remember Napster. Yeah, we're a little older than we look, I think.
So I would have been delighted. You know, I had a CD back then. I would have been delighted if I was the number one most shared, if one of my songs was the number one most shared thing on Napster. I could have definitely made a living if my music was good enough for that theft to take place. Right. So I thought it was bizarre when like Metallica or the Motion Picture Association were like, how dare you, you know? And it's like, okay, it's like you made it. Like Metallica was the drummer from Metallica was super anti-Napster. He testified before Congress and stuff. And I get it. They are stealing it. Yes, they are. But for people that made it in the old system, they're like, well, we already made it. Like, so to them, it just seems like theft. But to people that hadn't made it like me, It was like, wow, this is a new way to reach my audience.
Oh, interesting.
So I just had a totally different perspective on it. And probably that's the perspective that I have now, or that's the reason I have the perspective I have now, where it's like, if it's good enough to steal, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, it's a
Sure.
little
Yeah.
bit different with the AI thing because they just sort of like gobbled everything up and now it's in there and you don't know what's in there. You don't know what you definitely, well, we'll see, but you're probably not getting credit for it or whatever.
Mhm.
But
Most likely.
I never heard of Studio Ghibli before, but
Mhm.
I've heard of them now because they were I think the first Sora, whatever the first image generator was. I think it was Sora, like launched this mode where they're basically completely ripping off the style of this animation studio. But it's like, but now they're famous. I remember it was probably, what month is this? It was maybe 6 months ago. I started getting leads where I would say, oh, do you remember how you heard of me? And they were like, your name came up in ChatGPT. And it's kind of like SEO, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm like, but what I found was the people who come to me from like a Google search, they're very drive by. Yeah, I don't know who this guy is. Let me check this out. And don't they're not. I've never had someone say like, oh, how did you hear of me? And they say a Google search. Like nobody
Mhm.
says that.
Right.
So what it feels like, or the analogy I think, is that when someone finds you on ChatGPT, it's similar to getting a referral
Mhm.
versus a Google search, which is just like flipping through the phone book and like, what's the list of people who do this thing? And the leads come in really hot. They're like, ChatGPT said, you're the exact person for this. I went to your website. It's totally true. You're the exact person. And they don't even look around. They're just like, let's do this.
Oh,
So
Okay.
interesting.
would you rather not show up? Would you rather not have your ideas show up? Or would you rather have your ideas show up? And I would rather have my ideas show up because I'm on a mission to rid the world of hourly billing. So I need the maximum number of people to hear this. And it's such a
Mhm.
boring, non-mass media subject. I'm not gonna be on The View,
Mhm.
talking about hourly billing. So how do I get it out? I get it out, uh, you know, I don't try and do SEO, but I'm sure I do come up in Google search for a lot of things,
Mhm.
but showing up in Claude or ChatGPT or whatever, I'm like, yes, that's awesome. Rip my ideas off all you want. It,
Mhm.
the whole point is for my ideas. I want them to spread. So if the question becomes, well, how are authors going to make money? It's like, well, they'll figure it out. Like how do people who used to dig ditches figure out how to like make money when the steam shovel came? Like they figure it out.
Mhm.
Mm.
And I'm not saying that it's no big deal, and I'm not saying
Yeah.
that there can't be a lot of disruption and people getting forced into change that they don't want to make. I totally recognize that, and it's not fun. And I've counseled a bunch of people who are just like, my job just disappeared.
Mhm.
So that sucks. I admit it. But for somebody who's entrepreneurial, thought leadery type, expertise based business, you're gonna it's gonna be fine. You're gonna be fine. You want the
Yeah.
ideas out there. Hiding
Yeah.
them
Like you
is the exact opposite of what you want.
Yeah, that's
100%.
fair. Although you will not use AI in your newsletter, which I think gains your respect as well. So
It's
you
just
get
not
that.
good.
Yeah.
It's not good at it. I mean, I tested it to see if it would
Mhm.
work. It doesn't.
Mhm.
And it's really hard for me to imagine it ever. But the thing with writing the daily email is almost like a meditation for me. Like, why would it's like, oh, could I have AI hug my kids for me? It's like, I
No.
don't want to
Yeah.
give it the tasks that I like doing.
Right.
And if you don't like writing every day, then you probably shouldn't write every day. Do something
Right.
else. But I
Right.
like it. So, and it's much easier than weekly. I've interviewed plenty of people who've tried it and are like, wow, that really crystallized my thinking. I can really articulate my ideas now. When I go into a sales interview, I know exactly how to say what I'm trying to say. It's very personal development, business development, or not business development in the literal sense, but it is a it is a growth move for people who are selling their expertise to be able to articulate it to non-experts. It makes you way more accessible in every aspect of your business interactions. So it's practice, and if you outsource your practice to something else, then you're not going to get good at it.
So if you can go back in time, right, and talk to yourself in the first years before going independent, being
Mm.
an entrepreneur that you are, What would
Hmm.
you say to yourself now compared to
Mm,
then?
right. Back then, I didn't realize, like, I had a bunch of really good years right in a row, like, just really good. Um, because I was copying the activities that my boss Chris had been doing. So he would speak at the conference, he would write books, and he wrote
Mhm.
in the periodic, the trade publication. And so I was like, I'm going to do that because I saw that the phone magically would ring with people who we'd never heard of who thought Chris was famous. I was like, I need
Yeah.
that. It's kind of like an early version of personal brand almost. Um, so I was like, I got to do that. I wrote a couple books, a million conferences, and magically, guess what happened? I got tons of leads and good ones too. But what I didn't realize was that those are marketing activities. If you'd have asked me, I would have said, I don't do any marketing. I just write books and speak at conferences. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, buddy, what do you think those are? You know, because you're not getting rich off of a business book unless you're James Clear, but
Right.
it's very rare. And it's extraordinarily rare to make any kind of reasonable money off of a book, even self-published. So it's marketing. It's like people pay $10 for you to maybe hire you. Anyway, uh, I would tell myself those are marketing activities. And if you stop doing those activities, you're going to stop getting leads. And if you stop getting leads, your calendar is going to be empty and there's nobody to look at except for you. Like the reason why your calendar is empty. And sure enough, after we had our second kid, I was like, you know what? I don't want to write another book. You know what? Flying around so much, it's not good. My poor wife's here with two little kids. And so I stopped writing books and I stopped flying around. And guess what happened? I stopped getting leads. And like, man, I haven't had a lead in like 3 months or something or whatever it was. And then it was like, once that flywheel stops, it's really hard to get it started again.
Right.
So I would go back and say, look, you are doing marketing. It's these things. You can stop doing those things, but you have to replace them with something else. Probably, and it was podcasting and writing a mailing list. Like that's what I switched to because I didn't want to fly around. I don't enjoy traveling and I like writing and I find podcasting very light lift. It's fun. You get to meet cool people. You have a fun conversation
Right.
and it's easy. I mean, you guys have to do all the work. Like, I just show up and talk and then you have to do all the hard part. But yes, I have my own shows too. And so I understand it. So we're in the same boat there.
Right. What kind of advice would you give your kids if they went into entrepreneurship today?
This is what I would say, but I know that they wouldn't understand it. Almost nobody understands it right away. So I'd find a way to communicate the following. The way to make money, which is what you're doing, yes, you probably want to make an impact. And yes, you want to support your values and the values of your community and all those things. But if you're not making money, you're going out of business. So you have to make money. So if you want to make money, understand that money comes from the value you created for your customers, not from how much it costs for you to make the thing. So you could spend $1 million to make one of these amazing paintings that I see behind you, but that doesn't mean that anyone wants it.
Right.
Just
Right.
because you work so hard, people have to want it. So that let's just use the most common uh, business lingo is like you have to solve a problem for somebody or they're not going to give you their money. So
Mhm.
focus on what problems you can solve and just notice them, collect them in a notebook or something. Like you notice a problem, It could be regular person problem, like their sidewalks not shoveled, or it could be a business problem like their taxes get filed late every year or something. And so, like, okay, what are these problems? What are these problems? Find problems. And if you find a really expensive problem that you're qualified to solve, then solve that. And the price that you set is based on the size of the problem, not how hard it is for you to solve the problem. So
Yeah.
this whole idea that that income comes from problems or solving problems or creating value and not from I worked 10 hours, you owe me $1,000. It doesn't, that's not why people say yes to your price.
Right.
They say yes to the price because they'd rather have your solution than the money and they get a profit out of it. If they would have paid twice as much, then that part that they saved, that's profit for them, even though the money's coming your direction. So find problems and solve them. That.
Jonathan, thank you for meeting with us. It means a lot. I really appreciate it. It was very fun and
Oh, good.
a lot of good nuggets of knowledge there was definitely got that. So I really appreciate it.
Great. Yeah, it's fun. It's not the normal kind of interview I do, so I really it was enjoyable.